Saturday in the month of November of the 2025 college football season as we welcome you to week number 10 in the pregame show right here on Big Ten Breakdown, a part of the I-80 Club. I am Ben Stevens. Thank you for joining as always. It is week 10. It is November now in college football as we begin the final full month of this 2025 regular season. Every single game, all 6 matchups that we have around the Big Ten Conference on Saturday, November 1st, adds on that additional wrinkle of importance for Big Ten standings, for bowl eligibility, and trying to get to that 6-win threshold. And of course, for certain teams in this league, Ohio State and Indiana, namely this weekend, and some other ranked teams trying to stay within striking distance of a college football playoff spot or remain undefeated. Of course, as we say welcome, we also remind you to make sure that you are following, subscribing, liking wherever you get your favorite shows in podcast form. That's Apple, that's Spotify, on YouTube if you are watching, and I hope you are. And of course, all across the socials. And if you want all of the great content that the I-80 Club is producing on a basically daily basis, you can get all of it advertisement free at patreon.com/I80 Club. That is I80 Club, which is probably the perfect segue into the big news before we enter the week 10 matchups that we will break down here on this week 10 pregame show. Because if you are a subscriber of the I80 Club, then you had the beat on the big news out of Lincoln, Nebraska. And a sincere shout out to the great sourced work of our very own Josh Peterson for his announcement that Matt Rhule was set to sign an extension to remain in Lincoln and take his name out of what is going to be a chaotic coaching carousel here in 2025. They discussed that on the I-80 Club football show, getting you ready for week number 10 and beyond with all the great Nebraska football coverage provided. And then we got the official announcement from the Huskers on Thursday. But please credit Josh Peterson for having this before anybody else in doing the behind-the-scenes work to break this monumental news, not only just in the Big Ten, but of course across the national landscape. And here is the news. Matt Rhule signs a contract extension to remain at Nebraska through 2032. Just a 2-year extension. His current deal runs through 2030. There is not necessarily a raise in the base pay for Matt Rhule and Troy Dannon, the Nebraska athletic director, getting this job done. There are some college football playoff performance incentives. For instance, every year Nebraska reaches the CFP, Matt Rhule gets a $1 million pay bump in terms of that base salary. So if Nebraska succeeds, Matt Rhule's bank account will as well. But really what factors into the 2025 coaching cycle is the raise in the buyout if Rhule leaves Nebraska on his own fruition. It moves from $5 million in the current contract to $15 million. And as the report shared, basically taking Matt Rhule out of consideration, namely for the job at his alma mater for Penn State. Now, there was a lot of college football chatter, and I understand it to a certain degree, about Nebraska having to have the foresight to pay Matt Rhule, to extend Matt Rhule, to insert those performance incentives that will come with some financial flexibility. And the average annual value of Rhule's deal, despite the base pay in the salary remaining the same, the final year of his current contract through 2030, that base salary was going to be $12.5 million by the end of this decade. The additional 2 years are just that, $12.5 million for 2031 and 2032. There is not a pay raise up front, but many people started to look at the annual average value of $11.7 million if the deal gets all the way to 2032 in this current climate. And they said, why are we paying Matt Rhule this much? Why would Nebraska try to keep this guy locked down and in-house? The guy can't win big games. He's got 2 victories over ranked foes in his time. He is 0-18 against AP top 25 opponents, while the head coach at Baylor and now at Nebraska, the Huskers are riding a 28-game losing skid against ranked opponents. We'll talk about the next one they have upcoming on Saturday night in just a matter of moments. In what world, even in this current era of college football, would the Huskers have to pay Matt Rhule right here, right now? He's not worth it. He's not that great of a coach. He doesn't deserve it. I'm here to tell you, you're wrong. Matt Rhule is a program builder. Everywhere that Matt Rhule has gone, it's why year 3 Matt Rhule exists. He builds a program from the bare bottom, and at some places like in Waco, disastrous bottoms. Here in Lincoln, a place where they were trying to get back to the grand levels of success for one of the standard bearers of college football. And Matt Rhule is starting to do that. So if you believe in somebody showing you positive progress year over year, improvement over improvement, you are going to want to keep that stable foundation that is currently in Lincoln, Nebraska, stable for the entirety of the journey. In the actual contract extension, the deal done by Troy Dannon, as we just shared, is not more financial incentive for Nebraska up front necessarily to keep Matt Rhule in Lincoln. It is basically, if we win, you win. If Nebraska reaches the college football playoff and gets to these high heights that would be deserving of an $11 million per year contract, then Matt Rhule will see the financial bump as well. And as we got reports all around the country, part of the reason this deal got done now is because some of those big donors that have the big pocketbooks that can spend for Husker football were a little bit worried about Matt Rhule's potential of leaving for Penn State. And Matt Rhule said it when he was asked about the opening for the Nittany Lions. I want to make sure we are at the forefront of spending in this current era of college football. And by all reports, now that the extension is done, the stable foundation remains exactly that stable. There is going to be the financial backing for Matt Rhule to do what he needs. But let's also reflect on what he has done now in 2.5 seasons here in year number 3, about to embark on perhaps the most significant November game Nebraska has seen in damn near a decade. And the reason it is potentially the most significant November game that Nebraska has seen in damn near a decade is because of what Matt Rhule has done for the Huskers. They are 18-15 now in the 2.5 years under Matt Rhule. They earned a bowl berth last season for the first time since 2016. Their first bowl win in nearly a decade as well. They are going bowling in back-to-back seasons, already hitting that 6-win threshold with the victory over Northwestern a Saturday ago. They are going bowling for a second straight year for the first time since 2015-16. In the 3 years now under Matt Rhule, Nebraska has won 6 one-score games. In the prior 6 years before Matt Rhule, that number was only 9. In 6 seasons, 18-15, the record under Matt Rhule. In year number 3, the previous 6 years, 23-45, a win percentage below 39%. Matt Rhule is starting to change the narrative around Cornhusker football, is starting to put those pieces in place where you can see clear progress, not just in competition, but in the actual results, the wins that will always matter. So for me, it makes a ton of sense that in this current climate, Nebraska offers up the contract extension. And although maybe you saw it from Pete Thamel and others across the college football landscape, never forget, here at the I-80 Club, we've got our newsbreaker too. His name is Josh Peterson, and he did a fantastic job fleshing out this story, reporting it, and delivering that news for all of you to consume. Now, quickly, where does this leave Penn State, right? Even though some Penn State fans were very much not hoping that Matt Rhule was going to be the next head coach in State College, actively campaigning against Matt Rhule returning to his alma mater and working once again for his good friend in Pat Kraft, it seemed a likely pairing. So the 2 first names that we thought of kind of in the hot board for Penn State coaching, Curt Cignetti at Indiana, Matt Rhule at Nebraska, basically now off the board. Where does Penn State go? Are they back to the drawing board? Or was this part of the conversation as well for Pat Kraft and the Nittany Lions? Again, I still think some of the names that you will hear, Jeff Brom, who has done an incredible job at Louisville, that's his alma mater, Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri, or perhaps, as we are starting to see as you really break down college football and some of the most successful head coaches at this moment, a coordinator that has no prior head coaching experience, like the guys winning at the highest level, Ryan Day at Ohio State, Dan Lanning at Oregon, who has, quote, 0 interest of leaving Eugene. But if you know that, you already knew that for Dan Lanning. He's going to stay the head coach of the Ducks for however long he wants, and the wins keep following. And other guys like Marcus Freeman, who was only a defensive coordinator before seeing his success at Notre Dame. So you will hear names like a Brian Hartline at Ohio State, or maybe a Will Stein at Oregon. Will Stein going to Penn State might be too big of a jump, but just throwing out some names that maybe we are not thinking about. And I'll still throw out this, although I do not want it, Syracuse's Fran Brown, who has that relationship with Pat Kraft working together at Temple as well. So that was the big news. Matt Rhule signing the 2-year contract extension through 2032 to remain in Lincoln, Nebraska, a place he calls home, a place he is bringing success that they had not seen in a very long time back to, and a place that now has a stable foundation to continue to improve and progress in a positive way. It is not a finished product. It is not a college football playoff team, more than likely this season for the Huskers, but it is getting there. And you have the guy that is getting you to those stages. Keep him there. Troy Dennon did a great job of that. Speaking of Matt Rhule and his Huskers, in the most significant November night home game the Huskers have seen in a while, now we get into the Week 10 matchups. Only 6 around the Big Ten. It is time for the Big Ten breakdown game of the week in prime time in Lincoln, in Memorial Stadium, under the lights. Number 23 USC and Nebraska, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday on NBC. Again, I already said it is perhaps the most significant November night game, or the most significant November game in general for Nebraska in nearly a decade. It is the first November night home game in Memorial Stadium since 2016. It is the first time the Huskers have hosted a ranked opponent in a November night home game since 2015. You get the primetime billing because the game carries importance. And that's exactly what Nebraska has at home on the first Saturday of November against USC, who also has an incredibly important result awaiting as they hit the road to take on the Huskers. And part of that is the narrative for this game, right? Nebraska trying to snap the 28-game losing skid against ranked foes. USC currently number 23 in the country. USC having to fly to time zones into a cold weather night, supposed to be near freezing, around 30 to 32 degrees in the evening hours in Lincoln on Saturday night. Is USC's inability in large to win as a member of the Big Ten or otherwise under Lincoln Riley when they have had to travel at least 2 time zones, Pacific to Central. That is 2. Under Lincoln Riley, the Trojans are just 1-7 when they have had to make that far type of road trip, 2+ time zones away. The only win for SC under Lincoln Riley, 2+ time zones away earlier in the year in West Lafayette in September against Purdue. Maybe one of the beneficial things for USC is the rest they got before this. An open week, a bye week for USC to reset after their last road trip to Notre Dame did not play out all that well. And in that game against the Irish, the old USC, the ones that struggle with the physicality to defend the run for the Trojans, reared its ugly head, allowing 306 yards on the ground and 34 points to Notre Dame. So to me, as we break down the X's and O's outside of the narrative, the key matchup is which defense makes the stops. It seems rather rudimentary. I completely understand it. But Nebraska has struggled with physicality throughout this season. In the 2 losses, they have gotten gouged on the ground by Michigan and Minnesota. On the other side, they have allowed a total of 16 sacks in those 2 games. What is USC good at? Getting after the quarterback. That is going to be key for the Huskers, who themselves have allowed more than 156 yards per game on the ground. Last week, Caleb Komolafe and Northwestern had their fair share of success, $172 on the ground. So the key matchup in which defense makes the stops. Can Nebraska contain a rushing attack of USC that struggled against Notre Dame without Wayman Jordan, not expected to play in this game? It's the walk-on in King Miller. And in the game against Michigan, where USC made that statement at home, playing big boy Big Ten football, the Trojans held Michigan to only 109 yards on the ground. They had 224 against Michigan. Well, against Notre Dame, they allowed 306 rushing yards and only had 68 yards for 2.3 yards per pop against that Irish defense. Now, they're going to have some potential, perhaps, against this Nebraska rush defense that under John Butler has flat out been atrocious. Can Nebraska make that stop? On the other side, USC has been really efficient in the red zone this year. The Trojans have been really good defensively. 22 attempts in the red zone for their opponents, only 11 touchdowns scored, just about a 52% scoring percentage, field goals included, against that USC red zone defense, second best in the country, only behind Ohio State. And offensively for the Trojans, 36 red zone trips, 33 scores, nearly 92%, top 25 in college football as well. It will be critical for Nebraska. They are going to allow some points in this game. They're a 6.5-point home underdog. The total is nearly 60. It will be small technical blip right there, but we're back into it. As we were discussing in our Big Ten breakdown game of the week, the efficiency for USC in the red zone, both offensively and defensively, it will be critical for Nebraska at home in Lincoln to take advantage because USC's defense will allow you some chunk plays. It will be critical for the Huskers that if they get into the red area, they must strike, they must take advantage. That could be a field goal, but more than likely to keep pace in a high-scoring affair. Total is nearly 60 points at 58 in a hook. It will be critical for Nebraska to score touchdowns against the USC defense that has only allowed 11 red zone TDs in the 22 attempts against them so far this season. One of the strengths for the Huskers this year has been their pass defense, has been that black shirt secondary. Ground defense, very different as we discussed. But Nebraska, the second best passing defense in the sport, allowing fewer than 128 yards per game. Fourth best in passing defense efficiency. Those numbers around 99.3. Jaden Mayava on the other side for USC. Sixth best passer rating in the sport, 173.5. Again, key for Nebraska, key matchup in this game. Which defense is able to make the stop? USC is bowed up in the red zone, but can the explosive plays be the undoing of USC's defense? Nebraska has struggled all year long to the tune of nearly 157 yards per game, containing the opposing rushing attack. It is King Miller's show on a frigid Saturday night in Lincoln, Nebraska. All right, as we keep on rolling, that is the Big Ten breakdown game of the week here in Week 10 on the opening Saturday of this final month of the 2025 college football regular season. But way back in the summer, we had a different idea of what Saturday, November 1st would look like within the Big Ten and in large part all around the country in college football. We thought we could see 7-8 ranked versus ranked matchups based on the preseason AP top 25. Not exactly that. And of course, that is felt here within the Big Ten Conference. I could have told you on September 1st that come November 1st, early preview, Big Ten breakdown game of the week would be in Columbus at the Shoe. Ohio State and Penn State more than likely in a top 5, top 3, top 2 tilt. Of course, it is anything but. Ohio State, the reigning national champs, have held up their end of the bargain. Penn State, of course, not in this disastrous 2025 season. So the title for this game, a part of this Big Ten football weekend, what should have been the game of the week way back when. Penn State visits the Shoe in Columbus to take on number 1 Ohio State. It's a 20.5-point spread. Total is 44.5. Big noon kickoff still, 12 p.m. Eastern time on Fox. I'm not so sure Ohio State fans are mad about this particular game in this single instance being a big noon kickoff. 20.5-point spread in favor of the Buckeyes, basically at 3 touchdowns. If it stays right there at 20.5, it will be the largest spread in the Penn State-Ohio State series since 1995, in large part when all of the betting data started to be fully tracked. And one of the reasons why, of course, is Ohio State's defense. It's been a disastrous season for Penn State, but even at the best of times, it would have been difficult to score points against this Buckeyes unit. Ohio State has been the best defense this season in college football that we have seen in more than 30 seasons of college football. The Buckeyes have only allowed a total of 41 points in their first 7 games of the year, the fewest since Florida State in 1993. That year, FSU only allowed 38 combined points in their first 7 games of the year. And you might be asking, who won the national championship in 1993? Yeah, it would be Florida State. Ohio State, the fewest since 1993. Ohio State now one of 5 FBS programs since the turn of the millennium in 2000 to allow fewer than 50 total points in the first 7 games of the season. Ohio State's 41 allowed, the fewest of this bunch. But the previous 4 teams that allowed fewer than 50 total points through 7 games all played in a national championship game. 3 of the 4 ended up winning said title game and ending that season atop the pinnacle of college football. That is how good Ohio State has been. And thus, it is not exactly a prime recipe for Penn State's quarterback and Ethan Grunkemeyer making his second career start. In his first career start, also on the road, in a difficult environment in Kinnick, in a night game. This one, of course, a little bit earlier with the sun out. We hope against the stout defense of the Hawkeyes. Grunkemeyer, 93 yards and 2 interceptions. However, Grunkemeyer has often stated he has looked forward to playing in this game. His family is a Buckeyes family. He grew up fewer than 30 minutes away from Ohio Stadium. He has dreamed of playing in the Horseshoe. What that reality looks like is a very different story. And Ohio State fans have been dreaming of a defense performing in the way that they have. My key matchup in this game is not necessarily what can Ethan Grunkemeyer and the Penn State offense look like against the best defense we have seen in 3 decades in college football. That's a natural given. I'm not so sure the Penn State Nittany Lions score more than a touchdown, get more than 10 points. But I think to keep this game even within striking distance at any point, let alone in the second half, to even cover this 3-touchdown spread, my key matchup is a Penn State defense that has really struggled this year with some extra motivation on the line. Of course, the defensive coordinator in State College now is Jim Knowles. He was the defensive coordinator last year for the Buckeyes in the few years prior to that as well. They did not end on exactly the most harmonious of terms. I think Ohio State's defense, Ohio State in large, will be motivated. And I know the offense is going to be motivated to score a ton of points against this Nittany Lions defense. I would assume that Jim Knowles will have his guy that was ready to play. But in the 4 Big Ten games for Penn State this year, they have allowed at least 22 points, an average of 29.8 points per game in their 4 conference matchups. That is not what we anticipated for this talented and star-studded and NFL talent type Penn State defense entering the season. Of course, we did not anticipate anything playing out in 2025 as it has for the Nittany Lions. And we highlight the elite nature of Ohio State's defense, but let's not sleep on this Ohio State offense and its efficiency. Julian Sayin has been lights out against the best of the best. In the 5 games for the Buckeyes against power conference competition, 12 touchdowns without a single interception. In the 4 Big Ten games for Ohio State, 11 TDs without a single INT. Of the 134 FBS quarterbacks that enter week 10 with at least 100 pass attempts this year, only one quarterback has a completion percentage better than 75%. It's Ohio State's Julian Sayin, and his completion percentage is 80%. If Penn State is even going to keep this game remotely competitive or interesting for any bit of the 60 minutes, but certainly in the final 30 of those 60, I actually think it's on the Penn State defense to limit the explosive plays the Ohio State offense can present and get the Buckeyes and Sayin out of their rhythm. I'm not so sure that is the case. 20.5 is the point spread. 44.5 is the total. Again, that tells you that most of the scoring in the shoe on Saturday probably going to come from Ohio State. All right, that was the game that we coined what should have been the game of the week way back when. It is the opening Saturday in November, the final month of this 2025 college football season. And for some ranked teams within the Big Ten, it's time to take care of business. Big numbers, so take care of business is our next category. That includes the number 2 team in the country in the Indiana Hoosiers as a 21.5-point road favorite in College Park taking on Maryland. Total 50.5. Game kicks at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time on CBS. Indiana, Ohio State, 2 of the remaining 6 undefeated teams entering November and FBS college football. So, of course, remaining unblemished this weekend as 3 touchdown favorites is paramount. Making a statement once again in conference play only further impresses the College Football Playoff Committee with, I believe, our first set of rankings from the CFP, maybe this upcoming Tuesday. I'll check on that. And when we say big numbers, so take care of business, that has been the calling card for Curt Cignetti during his 2 years now in Bloomington. Indiana as a favorite, as we saw last Saturday against UCLA, 18-0 straight up, 13-5 against the number, with an average margin of victory in the 18 games booked as a favorite of 35.1 points per game. It is what Curt Cignetti has done so well, instilling that sort of mentality to never overlook an opponent, especially in Big Ten play, but anywhere on your schedule. And if you are expected to win the game, don't just win. Win by margin. Win comfortably. Be dominant in every facet. We highlighted this mentality from Cignetti in the way that he described UCLA in the Monday press conference getting ready for game week, highlighting all the Bruins had accomplished on the 3-game win streak entering last Saturday's tilt in Bloomington. He did largely the same for a Maryland team that enters this week riding a 3-game losing skid in Big Ten play. But what Curt Cignetti highlighted about the Terps is their outstanding freshman quarterback in Malik Washington, who has been great as a true freshman starter for this Maryland offense, and a Terps defense that under first-year defensive coordinator Ted Monachino has been awesome. Maryland leads the country in turnover margin per game, averaging a plus 1.6 turnover margin per game. Overall, it's a plus 11 for that Terps defense, second best in college football. Curt Cignetti put this on display to praise the Terps, to heap those praises on Maryland, making sure that his IU side does not head to College Park and think to themselves, whatever, it's November, we'll win this game, we'll win the next one, we'll stay undefeated, then we'll get ready for the college football playoff. It is each and every week that has been that calling card for Cignetti. Sadly for Mike Locksley, the calling card has been struggling in these games. This is a Maryland team that started off the year a perfect 4-0. They won their Big Ten opener in Camp Randall against Wisconsin. And when Maryland won that game, it felt like maybe a changing of the narrative of the Terps being absolutely stellar in non-conference play under Coach Locksley. Since 2019, Maryland is 20-1 straight up against non-conference opponents. Second best win percentage in that span, only behind Georgia. But now, dropping 3 straight in Big Ten play, the Big Ten record under Locksley is 16-38. And the interesting thing about the Terps this year, it felt like a change against that Wisconsin team. The Badgers are just incredibly bad, as we know. But in the 3 losses even, and of course in the win over Wisconsin, Maryland has held a fourth quarter lead in all 4 of their Big Ten games. They were up 20-0 over Washington at home at the break and squandered that game. They had a fourth quarter lead against Nebraska. The Huskers made the plays to come back. They had a fourth quarter lead in Pasadena against UCLA. The Bruins had the answers. So Maryland is close to changing that narrative of being poor in Big Ten play. I do not believe the Terps are going to have a fourth quarter lead or a second half lead or a first half lead against Indiana on Saturday. It is a part of that mentality. It is a part of that dominant nature that Cignetti has instilled within his Indiana program. For me, the key matchup is simply this. Can Indiana control time of possession and be ball dominant, right? We talked about how Maryland has taken the ball away, best turnover margin per game in college football. Well, Indiana has only turned the ball over 5 times this year. The last 2 weeks, we have seen Maryland give up a ton of rushing yards to Nebraska, more than $190, 193 to UCLA as well. Indiana last week put up 262 rushing yards against a UCLA defense that was trending in a positive direction. If Indiana is not going to put the ball in harm's way, Maryland can't take it away, and they struggle to defend both Roman Hemby and Kalon Black for this Indiana rushing offense, then Indiana should be in control and should cruise to a comfortable win, even flirting with a cover of 21.5 points. Just a tough spot for Maryland, but they're off a bye. Maybe they can keep this game a little bit closer than we anticipate. The next one up in big numbers, so take care of business, is also a 21.5 point spread in favor of the number 21 team in the country. That would be the Michigan Wolverines, hosting Purdue on Saturday evening in Ann Arbor, 7 p.m. Eastern time kick on BTN. Total was 49.5. Michigan, the last 2 weeks, following the tough loss to USC in Los Angeles, where it felt like they got away from big boy Big Ten football, has very much returned to that Michigan brand. Maybe the blue-collar jacket of Sharon Moore is working wonders that we cannot truly understand. Michigan has been playing big boy Big Ten football, trending in that direction here into the month of November. Last 2 games last week for Paul Bunyan, they ran for 276 yards against Michigan State, the most for the Maize and Blue in that intense rivalry series in 3 decades. Justice Haynes had 152 yards. Jordan Marshall had $110 on the ground, 187 yards for the Wolverines the week prior against Washington. Jordan Marshall leading the way that day with the injured Justice Haynes to the tune of 133 yards and multiple rushing touchdowns. Against the Huskies, Michigan also held UW to only 40 yards on the ground. Purdue is a defense that has struggled this year. You can put up yardage against the Boilers. Purdue allows 149 rushing yards per game. The key matchup for me is not necessarily Michigan dominating on the ground and winning this game comfortably. The key matchup for me is the continued development of the young and talented Bryce Underwood as we get into the month of November with a Michigan team that is in the AP poll and still with only 2 losses has a shot of being an outside college football playoff contender. So can we see that continued development for Bryce Underwood in the big house where he is incredibly comfortable? His home road splits, 4 games at home, 4 games on the road for Underwood this year. Yes, the competition at home has been a little bit more favorable than that of being on the road. But we saw Underwood last week in the rivalry game against MSU not necessarily light up the stat sheet by any means. Bryce Underwood in the 4 games at home is averaging 246.5 passing yards per game, 5 touchdowns to only a single interception. Completion percentage is 69.4%. On the road for Underwood, again, a very dazzling and talented true freshman, but still a true freshman quarterback playing at the collegiate level, 135 yards per game on the road on average, just 2 touchdowns to only 1 INT, but the completion percentage drops by nearly 19 points to 50.5. Can Bryce Underwood, in the comfortable setting against the Purdue defense that will allow you to rack up some yards, have a big game? My guess is the answer is yes to that. It's also interesting for the Boilers. It's why we talked about how disappointing the loss was last week at home in West Lafayette against Rutgers, the way it happened for the Boilermakers, the team that has one of the worst turnover margins in the country, on almost a comical play, not like ha-ha comical, but ironically so. Ryan Brown having the pass deflected back into his own arms, got stripped immediately, and it led to the Jay Patel game-winning field goal for Rutgers. We talked about how difficult Purdue's schedule is here. Their final 4 games in the month of November. It's not going to be easy. You got Michigan, you got Washington on the road, you got Ohio State, and you got the bucket game against Indiana. Sadly for Purdue, I'm not sure they etch across a Big Ten win in year number 1 under Barry Odom, which more than likely means Purdue will go winless in Big Ten play in back-to-back seasons, a combined record of 0-18. From big numbers, so take care of business, to our final 2 games of the weekend. Time to stack some wins. In November, there's a lot to play for, even if you fall short of a college football playoff berth or, of course, contending for a Big Ten title. That starts in Champaign for Illinois. 12.5-point favorite against Rutgers. Total is 52.5. It's a noon Eastern time kick on NBC. I think we see some points in this game. Total 62.5. I said it there. Illinois' defense has struggled. Rutgers' defense has mightily struggled. Ethan Kaliak-Manis has been awesome. Last week against Purdue, his 4th game this year of at least 300 passing yards. 3 of the 5 in Big Ten play for Kaliak-Manis. He has had at least 330. And against the Boilers, in a game that turnover margin was going to be key, he did not throw an interception for the first time for Rutgers in any of their Big 10 games. Last week, the Illini got torched by Washington's offense, nearly 450 yards. Damon Williams Jr., 280 yards in 4 passing scores. And I think one of the issues that we have highlighted for the Fighting Illini, that early in the year, they were remarkable at taking the football away and winning the turnover margin. But if you kind of read between the lines and giving up a lot of yardage and a decent amount of scoring chances, it was like a tiny Band-Aid over a very large wound for this Illinois defense that was taking the ball away, but was getting exposed in other areas. In the last 2 games for the Illini, against Ohio State, last week in Seattle against Washington, they have lost the turnover margin. And they haven't just lost it by a turnover. They've lost the turnover margin by 5 in their last 2 games. -5 in total in the last 2 for Brett Bielema and company. They were +7 in the first 6 games of the year. So, of course, Illinois' defense is going to give up some points to Rutgers, probably going to give up some yardage. But on the other side, they can take advantage of a pretty bad Rutgers defense as well. So the key matchup for me, can Illinois find that offensive spark once again? Just 337 total yards last week against Washington. They were averaging 383 yards per game prior. Luke Altmaier threw 2 interceptions in the game against the Huskies, more in that game than the entirety of his first 7 when he only had a single interception. And this starts a November for the Illini that will be crucial. Illinois had the 9th hardest schedule in the country up to this point, according to the Sagarin model. 9th hardest in all of college football, by far the hardest within the Big Ten. Well, the final month for the Illini looks like this. This home game against Rutgers, home game against Maryland, road trip to Madison and a bad Wisconsin team, in the land of Lincoln Trophy against Northwestern at home in Champaign. Illinois should be a comfortable favorite in all 4 of those games. And they may fall short of my expectation or my prediction or my hope for Illinois this year to be a 10-2 team for a second consecutive season and perhaps a college football playoff contender. Illinois more than likely not going to be in the CFP running, not going to get to 10 wins already with 3 losses. They have not looked overly competitive in any of those 3 losses as well. Games they probably needed to win at least one of them to feel better about that candidacy of being a college football playoff team. Probably going to fall short of that expectation. But to be 9-3 after a 10-2 year, the sky is still the limit for what Brett Bielema is building in Champaign to continue that success year over year over year, and not only stack some wins here to end out the month of November in 2025 and plan an awesome bowl game near New Year's Day, but continue that positive momentum in Champaign into 2026. Our final game of the weekend, and time to stack some wins. It's Minnesota at home in the Twin Cities against Michigan State. The Gophers just a 3.5-point favorite. We'll talk about that line in just a moment. 45.5 is the total, a 3:30 p.m. Eastern time start on BTN. Michigan State still seeking that first Big Ten win in year number 2 under Jonathan Smith. Minnesota looks for another bowl appearance. To get to that 6th win threshold, to get to bowl eligibility, it will be the 7th straight season in a full year that PJ Fleck leads his Gophers to bowl eligibility. Now, the line is a little bit interesting. Line opened at 5.5 in favor of Minnesota. Neither of these 2 teams, last week especially, put out a product that would really infatuate the public to put large amounts of their hard-earned money on either side. But most of the public was on Minnesota, and yet that line has dropped from 5.5 to 3.5, even getting as low as a flat 3 in favor of Minnesota, which is interesting. Because when you look at what the Spartans have been this year, personified in a huge rivalry game in East Lansing, and looking undisciplined, looking unprepared, and the response from their head coach after has been incredibly lackluster, Michigan State has the 2nd worst margin in Big Ten play, minus 17.2 points per game. The only team with a worse margin in conference action so far in 2025 is Wisconsin. And you do not want to be in the same category as Wisconsin in Big Ten football this year. Michigan State's defense has allowed at least 31 points in all 5 Big Ten games, an average of 38 points per game, 2nd worst in the Big Ten. Only Illinois is worse, which is also one of the reasons that the Illini need to figure some things out offensively to keep pace with Rutgers on Saturday. Minnesota last week only had 133 total yards of offense against Iowa. Something is weird with Darius Taylor. Will he play? Won't he play? Was not on the injury report for the Gophers last week in the critical battle for Floyd against Iowa. Played 3 offensive snaps, ran the football once, did not return to action. When he is out there, Minnesota's offense is just far superior, whether he's a pass catcher and a reliable target for the young quarterback in Drake Lindsey, or, of course, running the dang ball. He makes this Minnesota offense so much better. Could that be one of the reasons for this weird line move? We don't expect to see Darius Taylor out there that has battled his fair share of injury, and oftentimes we're not entirely sure what his status is. It is never crystal clear, it feels, entering a game for Minnesota. But Minnesota should be able to take advantage of Michigan State on the defensive side of the football. Big one for Michigan State defensively. Joe Rossi, who brought some of that fire last week on the sidelines for MSU, is said to remain on the sidelines for Sparty the remainder of the way, is taking on his former team in Minnesota that he left to go to East Lansing, and what I thought was a great move for Jonathan Smith in establishing his coaching staff. Key matchup for me in this game is Michigan State going to bring the intensity of their defensive coordinator? Is Michigan State going to match that fire that I know Minnesota is going to play with? There is zero doubt in my mind that PJ Fleck will have his Gophers ready for this game, understanding what a win means for this program. Win number 6, bowl eligibility. Again, consistent success year over year, and now nearly a decade under PJ Fleck. They have reached a bowl game in every full season since 2018. That was Fleck's second year in the Twin Cities. You throw out 2020 and his first year in 2017 when they won only 5 games. Minnesota has gone bowling and will go bowling with a victory against Michigan State 7 of 9 years. They also have the longest bowl win streak actively in FBS college football. I know that PJ Fleck here in November will understand and share with his team the importance of this matchup against Michigan State. I am not so sure that Jonathan Smith will do the same for the Spartans. I am not so sure that although Joe Rossi might be screaming his head off on the sideline to try to spark some enthusiasm, Michigan State will play with it. Because we have seen a Michigan State product on the football field look undisciplined and unprepared. And I have said it a few times. I know Jonathan Smith is maybe not your most charismatic or energetic guy as a head coach, but some of the answers in asking for a reason why year number 2 has regressed in a negative way, why Michigan State has gone backward in 2025 as even compared to his first year in East Lansing in 2024, some of his answers have just been out of touch. And I feel a little bit off base, right? Not really bringing any of that rah-rah that we can even start to remotely buy back into. So I know Minnesota is ready for this football game. I know the Gophers are going to be ready to get to 6 wins to make yet another bowl appearance. Key matchup for me is Michigan State able to, and will Michigan State match Minnesota's intensity on Saturday afternoon in the Twin Cities? All right, just 6 games around the Big Ten this weekend. This has been that Week 10 pregame show. Of course, we will talk to you following the weekend and highlighting the best things that we saw in our 4-down honors and beyond. And again, appreciate you being here for the I-80 Club. And never forget, whether it was breaking down all of these games or the breaking news that Josh Peterson brought you for Matt Rhule signing that extension, it's the beauty of what we're doing here at the I-80 Club. I'm Ben Stevens. Week 10 pregame show, I should say, now in the books. The Week 10 postgame show will be here when the weekend is through. Big 10 breakdown, the Week 10 pregame show. Once again, I'm Ben Stevens, and as always, thanks for being here.